Welcome to the channel. Thank you everybody for tuning in. Join me today where we look at two very popular watch brands on AliExpress and we compare between two very popular homage models. To my left, I've got the newly released Pagani Design PD1673, and to my right, I've got Cadisen's Royal Oak Homage. Both watches have been reviewed on the channel. Now, because they are homaging effectively the same watch, I thought it would make a good video if I compare both pieces, just to give you guys any clarification on which one to buy, the Pagani or the Cadisen. Now, as I mentioned, both watch brands on AliExpress have proven to be quite popular. Pagani even more so, primarily because of their Submariner homages, and Cadisen more so as well, because they do provide great value for money, and they also dabble in high beat movements, and they do make some pretty nice looking dress watches. So this watch, the AP homage, Royal Oak Homage by Cadisen, was very popular indeed. This one has not had as much exposure to get to that level, so it's my job today to review both of these, compare them both, and kind of tell you guys which one is better. I have made my mind up, but of course I need to, so I can give you guys my honest opinion. So let's start off. First thing we've got to look at is specifications. Now, as we're finding more so with a lot of these watches, the specs really change between both, and a lot of people, for around the £100 mark, can offer very incredible value for money. So both watches have sapphire crystals, they've got full 316L stainless steel construction, and both of them are powered by Seiko Epson NH35 movements, which, as you guys know, are extremely reliable, very cost effective, and very accurate for the most part, a lot of them running well below 10 seconds a day, and both come with 100 meters of water resistance. So what is different? Now, the main difference between both watches, especially in this review, is the size and proportions. To my right, the Cadisen is as follows. You've got a 42mm case diameter, a 48mm lug to lug, which I've had to measure from these points, and you've got a 12mm thickness. You've got a overall weight of around 178 grams. Now, the Pagani in my left hand, you've got a diameter of 40mm, a lug to lug of around 45mm, and a thickness of 12mm. So in the thickness, they are pretty much the same. You have an overall weight of around 172 grams, so not much difference there with the Pagani. The price, that is where you have the biggest difference. The Pagani Design comes in at around £100, which is approximately $145. The Cadisen, however, is much cheaper, coming in at £55 and around $75. But a point to note is Cadisen made a skeletonized dial version not too long ago, which I have reviewed, and that price did jump up to the same price as the Pagani at around £100, $140. Let's find out if the Pagani is actually worth the £40–50 that they want. So in order to address the differences, we need to take a closer look at the features on the watch. Let's start off with the dial. I will put some close-ups on there just to make things easier and for you guys to see. So both watches actually use this square waffle style dial. However, I do feel on the Cadisen there is a lot more detailing present. Now, I don't think it's just because of the color that the waffle design just sort of pops out more. There is actually more detail on the dial. So I'll put up close-ups now so you guys can see that as compared to the Pagani. It still is a waffle dial, but I think there's a bit more 3D dimensions present when you look at the Cadisen. But other than that, both dials do have a very similar setup. They both have a date window at the 3 o'clock. They both have a minute track on the dial printed, whereas Pagani's is a railway track, and Cadisen have just gone for your standard lines. And the Cadisen comes with applied batons for the hour markers, and it has candlestick like hands and a arrow tip seconds hand. Now, the Pagani here, we've got again stick like hands but a stick seconds hand, but you will notice that the hour markers and the hands are quite thicker than they are on the Pagani. The Pagani uses applied logo at the 12, polished with Pagani Design printed, and automatic above the 6 with Japan movement on either side of the 6 o'clock marker. And with the Cadisen, you've got a printed logo at 12, printed 100 meters, automatic above the 6. So again, very similar in terms of the dial. Which one do I think is better? I prefer the quality of the Cadisen dial. You can see just a lot more dimensions in there. You can see a bit more machining gone into the dial, which helps it sort of pop out. And whereas even though it's a waffle dial, it is a bit plainer. But again, that could be a preference. It doesn't stand out as much, and it's just a bit more subtle to the eye. But I do prefer the larger hour markers and the larger hand star on the Cadisen. It just adds to the visibility. Other than that, everything else is quite subjective. So let's turn our attention to the Lume and see which one is better. Now, I mentioned in my previous review on the Pagani that I felt that the Lume was absolutely useless. And as you can see here, the camera can't even focus. That's how low the light is. So let's give it a UV blast so they can have some sort of hope. So that is quite a bit better. Unfortunately, the camera is having some difficulty trying to focus on either one. You know, it is pointless on both, I'll be honest. On the Cadisen, there's not enough layers applied, and the Pagani is not enough layers, and the slithers of Lume are actually too thin. Longevity as well, both watches will be pretty ineffective. So with regards to the Lume, I'll be honest, I kind of expected as much. I didn't expect anything more from both watches. But it is what it is. Let's move on. So let's look at the bezel now. And the bezel on the Cadisen is an 8-sided bezel, but you've got these polished edges which do help smooth down the sharp edges, and you've got these screws which look quite different, sort of giving you a kind of an Allen key resemblance. Now you've got linear brushing present across the bezel, which actually continues down the whole bracelet, the whole case. And moving on to the Pagani, you've got actually flat screw heads, but you do have a different style of bezel where you've got 16 sides, and the top of the bezel is polished off and it is quite smooth. So it is a slightly different take on the actual bezel compared to Cadisen. Which one do you guys prefer? I'd say it is entirely subjective, and subjectively I actually prefer the Pagani one. It looks like it has been machined quite a bit more, but the brushing is the exact same as what you see on the Cadisen. The same brushing across the whole case, the whole bracelet. Now Cadisen do have another feature when we look closer at the lugs, where along the shoulders of the lugs you have got these chamfered polished edges, which, as I mentioned in my original review as well, I think it is quite nice to add these highlights to the sides of the watch. But Pagani have done something similar, not exactly the same. They've given you this chamfered edge along the case, which of course is polished, again giving you the highlights. Now let's turn the watches to the side. Let's have a look at the case. So you can see these facets clearly on the Pagani design. This one had a slight QC issue where you could just see some damage along the side. But let's rotate that, and you'll see again very flat sides, which have been brushed similarly to that what you see on the front of the watch. Now the Cadisen is a lot smoother. There's not much facets going along on the side of the watch, but rather than having linear brushing, you've got vertical brushing present on the side. So no edges, very smooth and machined quite well. Now the biggest difference here along the case is when you look at just below the lugs. So you've got this straight block there, but on the Pagani it's a bit shorter, but you also got a fitted end link that slots into there. Now let's look at the crown before we move on to the bracelet. The crown on this Royal Oak Homage by Cadisen, it doesn't really match the watch. You know, it's a big, bulky, edgy watch, but the crown is round, very small. In fact, the crown that they went with on the skeletonized version was a lot better. It was the 8-sided crown, which just feels a lot nicer to rotate. This is too slim, I feel, but you know, it works. It's got a Cadisen logo on there. Now comparing that to Pagani, they've done a bit of both, as I mentioned in my first review of the watch, where you've got an 8-sided crown just there protruding, but then you've got this circular crown also present with very much rounded off splines. It's okay. It can be a bit tricky to pop the crown out, and a lot of the times you do end up getting the second position, and you really got to be careful to get if you just want to do the date change. But you know, it comes with the sign logo, and I actually prefer the crown on the Pagani. And you know, I'm leaning towards a preference towards a Pagani, I'd say now, but it is mainly due to the dimensions. It just feels a lot more wrist friendly, and you can just see in hand. And I know a lot of you guys, you already know what you prefer. Now, this shot here, that really does set it off for me, and that is due to how the bracelets are made. I think this just looks a lot better the way it is, and the Cadisen, to be honest, it just looks a bit awkward. So I think where they have kind of failed is this link here. They've made it solid, right, and it fits in to the watch case. Now the taper on both bracelets is pretty much the same. So the first link on the Cadisen is around 26.5 millimeters. It tapers down to 18 mil. Now on the Pagani, it's around 26 millimeters, but it only tapers down to 20. So a slight difference, but I think most people would agree that the bracelet on the Pagani and the taper just suits it a lot better. Where Pagani have messed up, you know, this link here is actually an N link, but they could have just made it a female link because the mechanism is already there. You just got to give this some mobility, and I think a lot of people would have appreciated that over, let's say, the Cadisen's bracelet system. But again, you know, the Cadisen does have a shape. When you look at it side on, you know, it does have a shape that does sort of conform to the bracelet. It comes down, it's not mismatching, so they have tried to give it a nice side profile. And I can say the same thing for Pagani also, but you'll see the bracelet sort of curves in a lot more, and you will have better wear on this bracelet and better articulation. So on the bracelets, the differences are, you know, on the links, apart from the obvious, you know, you've got these straight 3-link style design with tapering. It's quite edgy, it's quite a sharp design, but again, it's fully brushed. It gives you a very similar light play, which is incredible to look at, of course. And you've got thick links. The links are roughly 3.7 mil thick, and you've got a butterfly clasp with some signage at the bottom. There is a fair bit of movement in the links, and that is going to be down to the split pins they've used. They needed to use, I'd say, some thicker pins to reduce the movement. But like the Jubilee bracelet that we see on SKX 007s, you know, is it meant to have quite a bit of play? Quite possibly. Butterfly clasp, you know, isn't the best clasp. They do feel a bit flimsy, and it does need a heavier duty clasp due to the whole construction of the watch. It is quite a thick watch, and this is where it just comes across as quite dainty, and this needs to actually be different and somewhat thicker. Now you've got a H-link bracelet on the Pagani design, and I absolutely do really rate this bracelet a lot more than that. You know, there's a lot more definition here. You can see the chamfering on either side present. You've got the chamfering on the center links, you know, all fully brushed, and it's just a nicer looking bracelet. Much nicer than the Cadisen. Now the Cadisen in comparison looks just quite primitive, in my opinion anyway. The bracelet on the Pagani definitely looks a lot better. But the Pagani also comes with a butterfly clasp. But they do have some nice signage here, Pagani Design. It's somewhat less flimsy than the Cadisen, but still a butterfly clasp. Now, due to the size of the bracelet and the overall size of the watch, you know, this has more of a chance, but I still think this should have been a different clasp, and it would have suited the watch a lot better. Both have see-through case backs, both have 100 meters of water resistance, so there's nothing there to see. And now I think what remains is just putting the watch on wrist and comparing both. So on wrist, what am I wearing today? I'm wearing the Escapement Time Mecha Quartz watch with the VH31 movement. I've got it on my Seiko Presage bracelet. And just a stunning watch. I'm a big fan, and I've been wearing this for a few days. And this, of course, has its own butterfly clasp from Seiko. So the first thing, let's put the Cadisen on. Now my wrist size is 6.5 inches. So on wrist, it isn't too bad. So where we see that the lugs don't actually move, on my wrist, it seems to just sit the wrist really nice. And you know, that I think really has saved this watch. It looks okay. Of course, it's a 42mm watch and does have a rather large presence due to all the metal that you can see here brushed. Definitely a light catcher, and it's definitely going to be an eye catcher as well. And that blue, it is quite a nice blue. You get quite a lot of detail sticking out from the waffle dial, and that's, you know, it's okay. Now we take that off, compare that to the Pagani. And again, 6.5-inch wrist. This, to me, in my opinion, does look a touch better. Size, yes, but the subtle aesthetic differences as well. Like, I do prefer this bezel. I definitely prefer the bracelet. I just like H-Links bracelets. And I think that is just a bit more wrist friendly. It just looks a bit nicer with the crown also. So, nice overall watch. Now, to summarize between them, it is going to be quite a subjective one. I don't think there's anything clear cut that makes one better over the other, because, you know, the Cadisen is only £55. The Pagani is almost double that. But the Pagani do give you a much nicer bracelet. And you get just, I wouldn't say it's a nicer bezel, it's just different. They've done a bit more work to it. You know, 16-sided polish to give it that curved sort of look. But the Cadisen for £55 is incredible value for money. You know, it's more watch physically, but yeah, in comparison, the bracelet is not as nice as the Pagani. It's not as refined. It looks just a bit primitive. It is quite edgy in between the links, quite sharp, and it does look unfinished compared to the Pagani. Right, and a bracelet on a watch, it is very important on how a watch performs. Of course, it's the thing that is holding it onto your wrist. But, you know, the lume on both is just poor. But I prefer the crown on the Pagani over this, you know, this little skin tag of a crown that you see on the Cadisen. But Cadisen's got bigger hands, bigger hour markers. So these are the things which you guys need to consider. Now, of course, if it comes down purely to money, like I said, you're not missing a lot from the Cadisen. But if you do want that, just a better finish and a better fit on the wrist, just an overall better look, I'd say Pagani Design is definitely the one to go for. Okay, so that's me done for today's review. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section. Remember, I will add a link within the description to both watches on AliExpress. And remember to check that out. And also remember to check out my Facebook group and feel free to join. Thank you guys for watching as always, and I'll see you on the next review.